Welcome back to the Ingaged Podcast. I'm your host, Pam Torrey, and today I'm joined by Nick Pacula of Creative Mind Concepts, a company known for creating standout marketing and sales materials that help businesses look sharp and sell smarter. Whether you're building a pitch deck or running a full-on sales presentation, Nick knows how to make it connect. In this episode, we're digging into why great presentations still matter, how to get buy-in from seasoned reps, and what makes a presentation not just good, but effective. And of course, we'll learn more about Nick's own path and what inspires the work he does today. So let's dive in. Nick, I am so happy to have you here today. I've talked to you a lot in the past. Our two companies work really closely. So I'm excited to get to introduce you to our broader audience.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I'm super excited to, again, kind of dive into things in a bit more detail because I know, our past conversations have kind of been more surface level, but excited to kind of give you some insight into how we do things over here.
So Nick, let's dive in and start with your story. So what is your background and what led you to your role today at Creative Mind Concepts?
Sure. So I think I always knew I wanted to be a designer. I just wasn't exactly sure what that would look like in a professional setting. So I started off by going to architecture school. I have a formal training as an architectural designer. That's kind of how I got my start. And then kind of continued on with kind of the academic side of things. I went to graduate school for architectural design as well at MIT. I taught there for a little bit. So kind of continuing on in this kind of in between being a designer and a researcher. And so, again, that was kind of sustaining me for a good period of time, but kind of kept it going. I actually enrolled in a PhD program in architectural history at Yale University, where I kind of worked in between, again, kind of the research and the design side of things. But a little while into that, it just, the design side of things was kind of, falling to the wayside while the research was taking over more of my time. And that became difficult for me. And so in the background of all of that, I had kind of taken what I had learned from architecture school and just kind of positioned it as, how I would bring that into the world as a designer. And so did some projects on the side that way. As I kind of segued out of academia and into a more professional setting, I started my own studio and started doing design work, again, kind of primarily in presentation design, just kind of learning that there was a market for people who needed help organizing their thoughts and presenting them in a coherent and clear and visually appealing manner. And then how I kind of came into my role at Creative Mind Concepts was by chance, really. Jeff, who is the CEO and founder of Creative Mind Concepts, he and I came across each other by chance. It was a kind of a mutual connection through our kind of various professional networks who put us in touch. But we hit it off and we kind of saw that we had a similar approach to business, a similar approach to design. And so he and I have been working together now for a few years, him now kind of more on the CEO side of things and me taking over the role of creative director. So in a nutshell, that's kind of how I found my way out of architecture school through a kind of maybe failed attempt at a PhD and then into, kind of being a designer full time and helping Jeff run Creative Mind Concepts.
Well, I did not know that you had a background in architecture. So you learn something new every day. But the big thing that I find to be funny is that everybody just sort of ends up working with the home improvement industry from very strange backgrounds. So like I have a master's degree in opera performance. Mm-hmm. You have one in architectural design. I know some people who've been professional sports players. Our CEO is a math teacher. Mm-hmm. It's just a really interesting way. Like we all have these really diverse backgrounds and sort of end up in this industry. But I think these backgrounds really help us when it comes to speaking the language of sales and marketing. And so I want to dig into that a little bit because you have worked with tons of companies on sales and marketing materials, like specifically helping them to sort of organize their presentations and figure out how to communicate their messaging. That's like the hardest part is that paralysis of the blank page. So,
Mhm.
what are the biggest mistakes that you see companies make when they come to you for a presentation? Like maybe the things they bring to you or the ideas that they have. What are those big pitfalls?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Because we see a lot of different kinds of presentations, right? We see, clients who don't have presentations and need to kind of get started and don't know where to start. But then we also see, clients who have had, presentation materials that they've been working on, for years, and they're really robust and they have lots of moving parts. I think though across the board, like whether you're, just getting started and, this is kind of the first time you'll be doing it, or you yourself are kind of seasoned pro and you're just kind of, coming to us for some additional support. I think what we see most often is companies trying to oversell, right? And kind of doing too much almost. I think that it comes from a great place. I think that a lot of the clients that we work with in particular, the reason that they end up in that position is just that they want to convey to their audience, to homeowners, that they know what they're talking about, right? That they're seasoned and that they've seen kind of every problem from every angle. But I think that in the course of a sales presentation or marketing materials, trying to convey all of that can be overwhelming, right? And it can be too much information. And so I think that trying to put in absolutely every single thing you've ever learned in the course of working in the home improvement industry can be too much for what might be a 20-minute sales presentation. And so I think that's definitely something that we work to kind of rein in, right? Like, what are the key points here that you want to cover? Within those key points, what are kind of the 3 or 4 key elements that you want to share with homeowners? Okay, great. That's what we're going to do in this part of the presentation, and that's it. Right. That other stuff that you're thinking about, that's going to have to come up at a later point in time, or you're just going to have to figure out a way to kind of really prioritize what it is you need to communicate again to your audience in this moment in time, and what can maybe come up at a later point down the road.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that a lot of our customers do in their regular business. A lot of these guys are not trying to do everything. They do, roofing, siding, and windows. They do those three things really, really well, and they are experts in that. But then when it comes to telling their story, like they just want to communicate everything, and you're here to pull them back and say, no, we need to do like the three things that we do really, really well. Let's prioritize that because we know this. Customers have to be told things a bunch for it to sink in.
Mhm.
They're if you put too much information, they're not going to retain any of it. If you tell them three things over and over and over again, they're definitely going to retain that. So it's such an important thing, I think, to just do less, but do it really, really well.
So asking, how and why sales presentations still matter in 2025. I mean, I think that a lot of things come to mind, but maybe what comes to mind first and foremost is that ultimately what a sales presentation is trying to do is to connect with its audience, connect with a homeowner, establish a connection between a homeowner and a contractor. And I think in that sense, that idea of connection is something that does still matter and will still matter tomorrow and several years down the line. The tools that we use to establish that connection and how we go about it might change, but establishing those commonalities, establishing what it is that a contractor, or again, just whomever is delivering that sales presentation, might be able to lend in terms of their expertise or product knowledge to a homeowner. That's something that I think again will evolve over time, undoubtedly, but is definitely kind of something that's here to stay. And so that's why I think sales presentations are still very much relevant in 2025, despite all of the tools out there that are available to kind of enable them.
So, can you talk us through what some of the key elements should be in a sales presentation? I know you see a ton of people, as you said, who are starting from scratch, and you see a lot of people who have something they've been using for a while, whether it's their pitch book or whether it's
Mhm.
a PowerPoint or a keynote or a digital PDF. When you're taking a customer on, what are the core things that you think every company should have in their sales presentation?
I mean, a big one that comes to mind is branding elements and branding assets. And, again, you kind of touched on there are companies who, we work with who are just getting started. And this is the very first time they've built a sales presentation and may not have branding elements or branding assets. And then there are companies we work with at the complete other end of the spectrum who have, mountains upon mountains of materials for us to work with. And I still think that regardless of, whether you're at either one of end of those spectrum or you're somewhere in the middle, having an understanding of your brand values, again, those kinds of things need to make their way into the presentation. So even if you don't have a lot of assets, kind of the ethos of the brand or the reasons behind, why someone got into the home improvement industry or any industry for that matter, those are the kinds of things that I think have to find their way into each and every part of the presentation. If we talk a little bit about just kind of structurally speaking, what kinds of things we often
that'd be great.
see in presentations, maybe sticking to the brand is a bit more nebulous, right? And it's a bit more, it's difficult to define. But again, it's important to know, what your messaging is and what component parts you have to kind of deliver that message. But again, if we jump into something talking a little bit more structurally and kind of, key sections and stuff. I'm a big fan of company stories or about us sections or why choose us sections, because I think that, it is important for homeowners to be able to establish commonalities with their contractor, right? And start building that relationship day one. And so, again, whether that is, community outreach elements or just kind of talking about, how long you've been in business or being a second or a third generation family business, whatever it is that is, kind of your unique element or your unique selling point, let's say. I think those are important features to include. And again, you don't have to have every single one of them, right? If community outreach isn't a part of your day to day, talk about who you are and why choose us through different channels. That's all fine and good, but something to that effect, I think, is very important. And then, I think obviously the big one is, what are your products and services, right? And again, that is a great opportunity to talk through your knowledge about specific products, specific brands, what kinds of, certifications and training you might have and so on. And so again, these are maybe basic elements that, people listening might say, well, yeah, obviously we're going to include those things. But you'd be surprised in the course of kind of going through this. And again, working with a lot of different clients, again, whether they're just getting going or they've been in the industry for, decades. I've received more than one email, months after we've completed a presentation where someone has said like, oh, we forgot to include this component part. And, you're looking back at it and you're saying, well, that's a big part of this, right? So I think taking stock of, who you are as a company, what you know about your products and services, what you want your homeowners to know about your products and services. These are really important core elements of any presentation.
So Nick, like you said, you've worked with sort of everybody, a good mix of people who are fresh and people who have been doing this for a long time, have had to get their sales reps bought into processes or bought into new presentations. I know just from talking to our customers and from being in this industry for the last almost 6 years, that it can be really hard to get that like more traditional sales rep to adopt a new presentation, especially if they are like married to their flip book, or if, they had this like digital PDF or this PowerPoint that they've been using for the last 10 years. And they're suddenly being told, hey, we've just redone your presentation. We worked with Creative Mind Concepts to build this great new piece of content. I need you to use it. And the sales rep's like, absolutely not. So can you share some just maybe best practices that you've heard from customers about getting buy-in on these new interactive modern sales presentations? Have you heard any success stories from customers just of ways to get people excited about the new content?
Well, right off the bat, like when we work with clients, and again, whether they're new to the game or they've been in it for ages, we always encourage them when we're going through like, the draft review process. Show this to your sales reps. Like, let us know what your sales reps think of this presentation, because we would love their feedback, right? Like, I want to know when I'm designing your presentation, if, 3 of your sales reps are like, this part of the presentation is not one that we really find resonates with homeowners as much as this other part. And so, that tells me that we need to, kind of reorder things, reshape the narrative and kind of move forward differently. So I think, again, it may seem obvious, but it's sometimes not something that actually happens when we get into these kinds of situations. And again, kind of want to get a presentation built as quickly as possible, but involving your sales reps in the process of actually redesigning a presentation or updating it or introducing, again, new technologies can do a lot to kind of, ease their minds about, what is it that we're going to be working with tomorrow that, again, so-and-so has spent several months, working and developing with, creative mind concepts, but we haven't seen yet, right? And then we're expected to adopt it in, less than a week and, be comfortable and kind of fluent with it. So I think, again, introducing sales reps early to what's going on, what changes are being made, can do a lot to kind of ease that transition. But I think also if you just have people maybe who are more skeptical of new technologies or more skeptical of actually making a transition from what they have and they know well, and works to a certain effect, and kind of transitioning to something new, can be showing them what's really possible with new platforms, new technologies. I mean, again, something that Ingage does very well that we like to take advantage of all the time, is video integration, right? And even though that's something that's very easy to communicate to someone, like, hey, we're working with a sales enablement platform that will allow you to work with video content. Showing someone what that video content look like, what that integration looks like. Again, that can be very powerful. And again, just kind of as it relates to our side of things, when we're working our way through, various drafts of a presentation with a client, there's almost always a light bulb moment where they're kind of watching us move through something and they go, oh my gosh, like that's what my content could look like. I had no idea that that's what video integration would look like, or something like a slider feature or something like that. So I think that's another thing. It's just kind of demoing this stuff, right? Getting your hands on it, and seeing what it looks like with your materials, right? That know well, but don't know well under the terms of kind of finding their way into a new platform or something of that nature.
Yeah, I always think about this when we work with customers. We're often working with somebody who doesn't actually sell in the home.
Mhm.
Maybe they're the person who's in charge of the content, or they're like a manager of some variety. Sometimes they don't even like work in the office where the sales reps exist.
Sure.
There's somebody who's maybe was brought in to work on this project. Like, you have to talk to the people who are actually selling, because they're going to tell you, hey, this is in the wrong order. Or no, we never talk about this because it's covered, during the needs assessment, or, this particular thing actually scares customers and we don't want
Sure.
to do
Sure.
that. So yeah, it is just so important to really think about bringing them into the process and ensuring that their voice is heard, so they feel like they have some ownership over it and, want to be part of getting this brought into the workplace. And the other thing you brought up is that, trying to like help them to visualize what it's going to be like. Our friend Chuck Toki, who's a sales trainer, he always talks about trying to get the mayor on your team on board. Like, every team has a mayor. They have
Mhm.
somebody who's like really influential, who's like the
Yeah,
the,
I like that.
unoffi- the unofficial leader of the team. And like, I can really think about how powerful it would be to get that person on board and get them like really bought into the fact that you can use video, you have interactivity, you have all of this functionality built into these new platforms. And like, how do you get that person to sort of help you evangelize to the rest of the team? Like, can you do what you were talking about with getting them on board with like that one feature, like the thing that's really buzzy in the play in the new presentation, get them on board with that, and then get everybody else using it from that point. It's just something that came to mind as you were talking. I was like, this is a great idea. We should do this.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's something that we try to stress with all of our clients, right? Is like, the decision makers, or in this case, right, like the mayors. We need those people in this conversation because, this is kind of a big picture element of your sales process that we're talking about, right? And that, again, earlier on we were talking about, why choose us, company story, these kinds of things. Like, the sales reps are the ones who are ultimately communicating those things to homeowners, right? And so if a sales presentation doesn't resonate with what they are doing in the field already, or complement or build on what they're doing, right, there's some disconnect there. And again, that can make the technology or make the presentation itself seem like it's not a good fit. But in reality, it's just something where, there need to be maybe a couple more voices at the table when these things are being worked out, questioned, again, interrogated, kind of ran through the draft process and so on.
So I would love to pick your brain a little bit on just maybe something that's kind of underrated. When you are building out presentations for customers or you're helping them to imagine what their content could look like or what that in-home sales interaction looks like, what is an underrated tip or best practice that you think somebody should have in mind while they are putting together their content or, prepping to roll it out to their team?
Yeah, so I think a big one is pacing, right? Like how you move through content, not through a structural sense, like, do we start with company story or do we start with price conditioning, but pacing through each kind of segment of each of those sections. And like this is a great example of something that I definitely saw a lot of in when I was in academia, and again, not always good examples, right? And so like you go to a lot of conference presentations, you present your research, and I've seen this happen to PhD students who are new scholars, and I've seen it happen to senior scholars as well. You'll be given an 8 or a 12-minute slot at a conference, and you try to read a 25-page research paper on very dense, complex, heavily researched material. It doesn't work, right? You just start reading line by line. You're reading really quickly, and it's difficult for your audience to get engaged. And the whole presentation just kind of falls flat because you're not pacing it well. And so, again, if someone were to kind of jump into the presentation design process and try to DIY it, something that I would try to pay a lot of attention to is pacing. So when you're within that company story or you're talking through price conditioning, like what elements are you moving through and when, and how long does it take to go through each of those component parts? And, are you spending 20 minutes on a single page of your presentation because you've put, 9 different component parts there, right? It might be too much information for the homeowner at that specific moment in time. Again, just as an example, it can be very good for them to know that, you offer a variety of different financing options, right? And so that, you're very confident that, whatever their needs are, that you can provide the right fit for them. But, going down the rabbit hole for each and every one of those channels, right? And going through kind of like 10 different options with 5 different providers, that can be too much. And so again, pacing, I think, is something that, distinct from kind of the organizational structures, something to consider, and kind of how you move through various sections. The cadence and the rhythm of the presentation is very important.
That is not something I even thought about, which I find to be hilarious because I am a trained performer.
I was
But
going to say, it's kind of in your wheelhouse.
I think it's just because it's something that I do naturally. Like
Sure. That's a good point.
I have decades of experience performing. Like I know how to hold a room. You put me in front of a group of people, I can hold that room for hours. They will be fine. But you don't think about it when it's something that you do all day, every day, that it's not necessarily something regular people think about. Like somebody whose expertise is in, I don't know, whose expertise is in roofing, they know how to put on the absolute best roof to your house. Your house is going to be just protected and immaculately cared for by this person who is an expert in this particular skill. But yeah, they haven't spent 20 years performing to a group of people. Pacing is something that they probably haven't thought about before. That's completely an underrated best practice. I'm stealing that and I'm going to take it away. It's mine now.
Okay, good.
Well, Nick, before we wrap up, there is something that I make everybody answer when they come. And that is, what is one trend in sales or marketing that you are keeping an eye on right now? And why does it matter to our audience?
So, something that I have been more and more interested in over the last couple of years, and it really does kind of coincide with, creative mind concepts, kind of developing a closer relationship with the team at Ingage, has been looking at kind of the differences between, but for me, maybe more the similarities between sales and buyer enablement. And
Mm.
so looking at, again, kind of the technologies and the component pieces behind sales enablement and what it means to kind of, again, enable your sales team to be as effective and efficient as possible. And looking at what those things can do to influence, shape, encourage buyer enablement. Right. And so what are the things that, we might be doing with an Engage presentation in this example that are, again, kind of part and parcel designed to enable the sales team, again, to be more effective, to be more efficient, to communicate more clearly with homeowners. But what does that in turn do to allow homeowners to, again, kind of arrive at a decision that they feel more confident about more quickly and have more, again, kind of more of a better worldview, let's say, of, what it is they're looking at doing, whether it's roofing, siding, windows, et cetera. And so that's definitely been something that I've been kind of looking into. And again, not so much looking at them as distinct and separate or comparing or contrasting the two rather, but just kind of looking at, where they overlap and where tools, again, that might have been siloed into the sales enablement, area kind of lend themselves to buyer enablement and strategies on that side.
Well, those two things sort of build on each other. I mean, you have to enable your sales team so that they can enable your buyer to get to yes. So it makes a lot of sense that we would want to start thinking about those as kind of like a Venn diagram. They have overlap, and we need to understand where that overlap is. And also, as we're bringing technology into the sales process more and more and more, sometimes sales enablement tools can be buyer enablement tools and vice
Absolutely.
versa.
Oh yeah, totally. I guess I should have prefaced that by saying that, I come at that, I approach that question or topic having, primarily we are working with sales teams, right? Like I
Mhm.
don't work a whole heck of a lot with buyers. And so that question, has kind of been more on my mind is, we talked earlier on about kind of, organizing, the various thoughts and resources that home improvement professionals have kind of at their disposal and putting them into a sales presentation that's coherent and makes sense. But again, that for me at least, and my role in this process has been primarily, sales team facing.
Mhm.
And so now more and more, I'm looking at it from the side of the buyer and what kinds of things could find their way into a presentation that, again, in this specific context, kind of lend themselves to an Engage presentation. Again, that are, as you said, kind of overlap. They are sales enablement tools, but they help with buyer enablement as well.
Well, Nick, I think that's a great place to leave it for today. It gives me something to think about so that next time that we chat, we can dig more into this concept of sales enablement into buyer enablement. I'm going to put a pin in this and we'll be back to chat about that later. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Ingaged Podcast. Be sure to visit ingage.io for more information on how to create, share, and measure your way to success. If you love the Ingaged Podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time.